What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Sarah Master 1 here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Power Rangers Ninja Steel, episode 12. The episode's called Family Fusion. Unfortunately, I was not able to do a review of this yesterday when the episode actually aired. Not the worst thing ever, but it does happen sometimes. But I wanted to do a review now. So, for starters, I'll tell you my opinion. I actually really did enjoy the episode a lot. It was nice. It was a good story. It also revealed some important information that was kind of already becoming more and more clear, though it wasn't official until this episode, about a certain character, and we'll get into that as we go into the episode. So, for starters, the episode, it's called Family Fusion. The episode begins with us seeing Ripcon coming into a kind of building where he ends up talking to Aiden, or at least the Aiden that we think is Aiden. So what ends up happening is that they end up talking. Aiden basically tells Ripcon that he wants to work with him, and he wants him to act as a distraction to help him find the Rangers base so that he can take all the Ninja Steel and give it to Ripcon. Ripcon can then give it to Galvanox. And Ripcon is tempted by the offer, decides to go along with it, and then Aiden and Matamotius talk to each other, and they basically say like, "Oh, that was very easy," and I'm sure that, and he also mentions, like, Ripcon also mentions how there are traitors among us, and then like Matamotius later talks about how she's like, "I'm sure he's talking about me." So clearly there's a little bit of a, he knows information about her, but he's not saying anything, and she knows that he knows. So, there's that element to it. So continuing on, though, Ripcon's supposed to attack, around the area, but at the same time, we end up seeing the Rangers in the school. We end up hearing that there's going to be a talent show going on, and Preston is going to do his magic show. Brody's going to sing with Aiden. And what we also hear is that Victor wants to initially do wants to be a bullfighter kind of thing, and it isn't able to do that because he's not able to have a live bull. So he wants to do magic. So then what happens is that Preston's doing his magic stuff. Eventually he has to go to classes. Oh no, he has to go off because there's a distress call from Mick. So he ends up going off with Sarah and Haley, and what ends up happening is that Monty and Victor end up going over to the hat because Preston leaves his locker partially open. They grab the hat, they each go into it, and then there's the rabbit inside there, and the rabbit starts freaking them out. So then from there, what ends up happening is that Brody and Aiden end up practicing their songs or whatever, and what ends up happening is that suddenly there's a distress call that means that Ripcon's attacking, and they also talk about how apparently there's the new fusion star which they're trying to make work, and it's supposed to allow all 6 Ranger powers to combine into one form. And the thing is that they have the 5 Core Rangers powers already synced up to it, but they don't have the Gold Ranger powers. So what ends up happening is that Mick has to go with Levi into the base to put the powers into the Ninja Nexus Prism into the Fusion Star so that they can access it. So what ends up happening is that Brody also has to go off on his own, but then Mick and Levi go into the base. Aiden follows them, initially saying, "Oh, no big deal," but you can tell that he's listening in, he's trying to understand what the Rangers are up to or whatever, because again, he wants to destroy them. So what ends up happening is that at that point, when he sees Levi go into the base, that's when he knows, so that's where the base is, and we even see his eyes glow a bright red. At that point, we know that something's up. So then at that point, Brody and Ripcon end up fighting. There's a lot of sword play going on, and eventually at one point, Preston ends up helping out Brody by throwing his sword out to basically help him out, and eventually he uses the 2 swords he has, his own sword and Preston's sword, to do a double attack, and then eventually we see Levi back in the base putting his powers into the fusion star, and then eventually he gets back his power star, and then he gets the fusion star. And what happens is that Levi ends up going out to throw the fusion star from a large distance to Brody, who Brody actually catches it. But what ends up happening is that Levi ends up forgetting his own power star, so he ends up going back in to go and retrieve it. But the thing is that after Levi had left, Aiden actually came into the base where Mick and Redbot were. And what ends up happening is that he ends up shooting them and paralyzing them. And what ends up happening is that Levi returns, and then Aiden and Levi get into a battle with each other. And what ends up happening, and things get interesting from there. But before I get into that, Brody actually ends up using the fusion star to channel the power of the 6 stars into some really powerful sword attacks against Ripcon, which does wonders for him in battle. And eventually he does have to retreat. But then what ends up happening is that we end up seeing Levi and Aiden fighting each other, and eventually the circuitry shows up, because apparently, for some of you that may already know this, which I do, Aiden this whole time was actually a robot. He wasn't the Aiden that we thought he was. So we see the circuitry, and he ends up speaking with a robotic voice at that point, and he isn't who he said he was. So what ends up happening is that from there, they continue to fight, and eventually the other Rangers see that Aiden was a robot, and they all attack the robot, and at that point, all the memory that was inside of the robot goes back into Levi. And it's interesting. And you may think to yourself, really, is that memory? But yes, it is. So what ends up happening is that suddenly he has all these flashbacks of different moments in time and all that. And he ends up in a daze. But the thing is that eventually they go back to the base, and there's and we end up seeing that the villains are talking to each other. Galvanox believes that Ripcon had been making all these attacks and had been secretly working on a robot to channel the Gold Ranger powers and all this other stuff, and he was doing all sorts of stuff undercover, when in reality it was Madame Odious, and Ripcon even blames Madame Odious, but she's like, why would I do such a thing? And Galvanox basically says, you have one more chance. Cosmo, I want you to gigantify Ripcon, and if you don't destroy the Rangers this time, then your history, Ripcon. So at that point, what ends up happening is that he ends up being gigantified. Also, 2 Skull Gators are also gigantified to go along with him. And so what ends up happening is that the Rangers have to go out and attack. They end up summoning their Zords, forming the Ninja Steel Megazord and the Bull Rider Megazord. They have to fight the 2 Skull Gators, which actually, after beaten up, turn into a sword, which Ripcon uses to attack them. So then at that point, they end up realizing, okay, well, we use the Fusion Star for our sword attacks. Why don't we try it for our Zords? So at that point, what ends up happening is that they end up using the Fusion Star, combining their powers, forming the Ninja Fusion Sword, which is the combination of all 6 Zords into one. So then, at that point, they end up attacking Ripcon, doing really, really well, and eventually the Skull Gators do split up again, but at one point or another, all 6 Zords combine together, destroy Ripcon, meaning that Ripcon is officially done with. So that means that you get rid of a core villain at that point. Still an important character, but he's done. So from there, what ends up happening is that we end up seeing the talent show that was going on. Preston ends up pulling out Victor and Monty. Well, actually, Monty is pulled out by Preston, and then Monty pulls out Victor, and then Preston pulls out the rabbit. So that's really cool. But then what ends up happening is that Preston ends up saying, and now I'm going to let my friend come out and perform as well, and it was Brody. And at that point, Brody ends up singing and saying that, this is a song that my father, sung to us when we were kids, and I hope one day I can sing it with my brother wherever he is. So then what ends up happening is that Levi beforehand feels that he's not feeling so well, and he goes down the hallway. Suddenly his eyes are like flashing, and he's not understanding what's going on exactly, but suddenly all these memories start coming back to him, and as Brody begins to sing the song, something in him just awakens, and he suddenly starts to remember the song. He starts to know it. So then at that point what ends up happening is that he eventually realizes what really has gone on, and what ends up happening is that we actually see the confirmation that apparently Levi's memories of his childhood were transferred over to Aiden, and false memories were put inside of Levi's mind, making it so that he had no recollection that he was Aiden. And we'll get into why that is at the end, because the episode basically explains it for us. So eventually what ends up happening is he remembers all this, he ends up singing with Brody, and then suddenly there's this clear realization where like they know that they're brothers. They know it. So yes, Levi is really Aiden, but you may think to yourself, well then why isn't he being called Aiden or anything like that? Well, so what ends up happening is that we end up seeing them singing at a campfire site at the very end of the episode, and they eventually talk to each other, and Brody asked the most logical question: when did you change your name to Levi Weston? And he said, well, our father said to hide, so I thought I might as well change my name, and music picked up and I did well. So, in other words, it must have been very, very, very early on, meaning that he had no recollection that he was ever Aiden, period. So, but the thing is that what the show does, which is good, because that basically means that, it wasn't like anyone knew that he had been Aiden. That's what I was curious about. That's what I wanted to know this whole time. When did that happen? When did his name change? Right from the beginning, I guess that means, which is interesting. As far as those memories that he had of like the train and all that, I'm sure that's probably pretty accurate in reality. But as far as things go, then they end up saying, well, I guess, just to make things easier on us, why don't we just keep on calling you Levi? So yes, he is Levi. Now, don't get me wrong, yes, he's also Aiden, and you can call him Aiden, you can call him Levi. I'm just going to go with Levi because the show is going to start calling him Levi and just going to leave it at that. But yes, his other name is that, and he changed it, so it's officially changed. Yes, his original name might have been Aiden, but his, the name that he will be called throughout the rest of the show will be Levi. Aside from the case where maybe their father returns and there's something brought up about that, I don't see many other occasions where they're going to call him anything other than Levi. So yes, if you're wondering why I'm calling him Levi and I'm going to keep on calling him Levi, it's because the show basically has said that is how they're referring to him. They're referring to him as Levi. They are not referring to him as Aiden because it just makes things simpler, less of a mess, much easier to deal with, and personally I prefer it. It's a cooler sounding name to me, and also it's like there's already been a good number of episodes where we've known him as Levi, so it's sort of like calling him Aiden suddenly sort of sounds weird. I mean, could you get used to it? Sure, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't so easily, so I'm glad that the show's just going to keep on doing it the way it is. But other than that, the episode basically ends with them singing, and the episode finishes off, and, it's just a really sweet episode, and it's an episode that basically, finally gets the confirmation going that, yes, Levi and Aiden are one and the same, that the Aiden that we thought was Aiden was not Aiden at all, and, so this is a big story episode. Next episode's pretty much a filler episode, and then 14 and 15 are story. And then we won't get story again until the very end of the show. So I just wanted to say that to you guys now. So next week, very much so filler, and then 14 and 15 are going to be important story, and then 16, 17, 18, and 19 will be for the most part filler, and then 20 will be some story. So I'd love to know your guys' opinions. Please really comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So, some crazy 1, and goodbye, guys.